Well, as the sun rose over London, Keir Starmer told a victory rally that a burden has finally been removed from the shoulders of this great nation. He also added, saying that our country needs a bigger reset. UK's new PM-elect Keir Starmer ushers in a new era in UK politics after 14 years of Conservative rule, following a stunning victory that brought his left-leaning Labour Party to power with a huge majority. Speaking outside 10 Downing Street, Starmer said that his would be a government of service, telling voters that you have given us a clear mandate and we will use that to deliver change. Starmer also pledged that his government would serve all Britons and that politics can be a force for good. We will show that, he said. So what does this era of change herald for the United Kingdom? What will be the Labour Party's immediate priorities? We'll take a look at all of those and we'll discuss those with our guests tonight. But first, let's take a look at what Starmer said right after the results became clear that his Labour Party had indeed gotten a historic supermajority. Take a look.
Now our country has voted decisively for change, for national renewal and a return of politics to public service. Yet, if I'm honest, service is merely a precondition of hope, and it is surely clear to everyone that our country needs a bigger reset, a rediscovery of who we are, because no matter how fierce the storms of history, one of the great strengths of this nation has always been our ability to navigate a way to calmer waters.
I will shortly be seeing His Majesty the King to offer my resignation as Prime Minister. To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. To all the Conservative candidates and campaigners who worked tirelessly but without success, I am sorry that we could not deliver what your efforts deserved. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons. I thank them for their hard work and their service. Following this result, I will step down as party leader, not immediately, but once the formal arrangements for selecting my successor are in place. It is important that after 14 years in government, the Conservative Party rebuilds, but also that it takes up its crucial role in opposition professionally and effectively.
And let's take the discussion forward with our guests tonight. Nicholas Nugent, who's a former BBC editor, is joining us. Also joining us is Manoj Joshi, Distinguished Fellow at ORF. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening to discuss the impact and, of course, the outcome of UK polls. Let me come to you first, Nicholas. Help us understand and of course, weighing on this Labour win. I mean, experts are saying that it was quite fragile, saying that it was less about the excitement for Labour Party, but it was more about public's anger towards the Conservatives. How do you really read this win?
Well, of course, any election is going to be a combination of the attraction of the victor and the disappointment with the loser, and there's certainly that here. I think I would sum it up by saying the election has shown the mood of weariness, if not discontent, with the Conservative Party that's been ruling us for 14 years and frankly has failed to achieve many of its targets. So yes, there is a considerable disenchantment factor with the Conservative Party, but I don't think that entirely rules out the attractions that the public have seen by voting for the Labour Party, who are a reformed Labour Party. They've changed a lot since they lost the last election rather badly. And I think it would be true to say that Keir Starmer, as the new Prime Minister, has a lot going for him, and a lot of the votes for him are personal, or at least for the party rather than the other. So I don't think we can entirely dismiss this as a disenchantment with the incumbent, because there are two sides to the story, and people wouldn't be voting Labour if they didn't think it had a lot to offer.
Definitely, Mr. Nugent. Thank you for your first comments. And let me now go to Mr. Joshi. Mr. Joshi, Mr. Starmer's speech today had a lot of hope, empathy, patience, reflection. But when he says that this is the age of national renewal and change begins, he of course used the word change a lot of times. What is the vision that Mr. Starmer here has for the United Kingdom?
Well, I think one important line that sticks in my mind, he said that the government is unburdened by doctrine. And anyone who knows the background of the Labour Party, its kind of attraction or its flirtation with the left wing, knows that doctrine has been a problem for that party. Besides that, I would just simply like to underscore what Nick has just said. The fact that the turnout in this election was one of the lowest in recent history. Number one. Number two, that the Tories may have, the Labour may have won 412 seats, but they won just 34% of the electorate, popular vote. And as far as the Tories are concerned, they got 24% or so, 23, 24% or so, which means that as has been pointed out, and as I think Mr. Starmer himself said that there's a kind of a weariness at the heart of the country. That's why the turnout is so low, meaning people are desperate. They're hoping that there'll be some kind of change. The nation has not done well in the last 4 or 5 years. This is the classic question that is often posed. Are you better today than you were 5 years ago? This is the normal thing that you say in the election. And I think many people in Britain would say we are actually worse off. And that is what Keir Starmer is addressing. That's what his speech today, as becoming Prime Minister, was all about.
Absolutely, Mr. Joshi. Let me come to you, Mr. Nugent. Now, as Mr. Joshi was mentioning, the doctrine has been a problem for the Labour Party. So it is important to also reflect where Labour Party was 5 years back and where it is now. So when Mr. Starmer speaks about a changed Labour, what exactly is he speaking about? If you could define the changed Labour Party for our viewers.
Well, as Manoj was referring to, it was tied up by doctrine when Mr. Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn, was in charge of the party and lost rather badly in the 2019 election. Now, Keir Starmer is trying to make the point that doctrine is no longer in the way. Indeed, he seems to be selling the party as a pro-business party, which is a big turn-up for the books, because traditionally the Labour Party has been socialist leaning and welfare state supporting. But now they say we can't really put right many of the country's problems to do with the welfare state, the health service and such forth, unless we first get growth, unless we first back enterprise. And that's the sort of line you would expect to hear from the Tory party, the Conservative Party. But they failed to do that. I mean, our growth rate here is abysmal. It's around 1%, whereas you in India have something like in excess of 8%. So we're really not doing very well. And that lies behind the result of the voting. There's a widespread discontent with the state of the country's economy. And indeed, the fact that quite a lot of people live not far above the breadline, and the state has had to help them out. So, in a way, you expect a socialist or left-leaning government to rise to that challenge. Well, they're doing so. They're going to rise to that challenge, but all within the context of let's get growth going, let's get enterprise going, let's get people back to work and make our country prosperous again. And I might add that there's a sort of line here that doesn't come out in the election, which again was referred to there. Has Brexit, has leaving the European Union disadvantaged us? Many people would say, yes, it has. And that's part of the reason that our economy is in quite a bad way. But it's too soon after the Brexit referendum and our departure from the European Union, it's too soon after that for any party to say either we should rejoin or we should renegotiate the terms. We've lost our major trading partner in a sense, and we're stumbling. That's the reality.
Right. Mr. Nugent. But let me ask Mr. Joshi. Mr. Starmer hinted at a lot of things, that he wants to now usher in. He said that change is not going to be easy, fixing the economy, bringing down inflation, of course, the immigration crisis as well that he has to deal with, and most importantly, bringing in trust in institutions. So Mr. Starmer spoke about a whole lot of these priorities that he really has. But what do you really see him prioritizing? And do you also see a reversal of some of the decisions that the Tories took?
Well, I think, the center of everything is reviving Britain's economic growth. Unless that growth gets going, Britain is not going anywhere. And I think anyone who has visited Britain or reads about Britain knows that after Brexit, and mind you, before Brexit, I recall reading something back in 2010 or 2011 that UK would have been the biggest economy in Europe by 2030. And now we see a country which can't get investment, where finance is flowing out of because of Brexit. The financial London as a financial center is suffering. Investment in the industrial areas, Birmingham, Manchester, is a problem. They had to recently, under the Tory government, cancel the railway line. They were the fast high-speed railway line they were making to the north to revive things. So the thing is, reviving economic growth is the most important. The second is rebuilding trust with the people. And I think there, Keir Starmer also referred to the problems of the National Health Service. The National Health Service is quite broken, and it's having a lot of problems. And this is one of the things which affects every person in Britain. So rebuilding trust in the government, that the government is not just involved in kind of showmanship and doing something substantive.
Right, and that seemed like a very sincere speech that came around this morning. Mr. Nugent, let me come to you and ask you about one of the other things that he touched upon, one of the other priorities. He said that the country needs a bigger reset, a recognition of who we are. I would like you to explain what reset was Mr. Starmer really alluding to. Was he alluding to an identity reset and perhaps a reflection on where the UK stands in an increasingly changing world order?
Well, I think all those things are true. I mean, reset, that sounds like political jargon to me. I'm not quite sure what he means by it, but I might say I found his speech this morning prime ministerial, and he's a guy who's been criticised for his style and suggested he's not ready to lead. But I really felt he commanded attention this morning and inspired respect. Precisely what he means by reset, I don't know. I mean, you could say reset is we've got a new team in charge. They're going to do things a bit differently. They're going to have priorities a bit different. But I might say, without taking sides in this, I think the hope and the expectation are both very strong at the moment. And that's partly because of the weariness over the Conservative government, as we've alluded to before. But I think the size of the majority, which is almost record-breaking, it certainly compares with that won by Tony Blair in 1997, that and the decimation of the Conservative Party, I think those two things give us a lot of hope. So you want to know what reset means? I think reset is starting with a new team, with new priorities, perhaps. You could call them even bright young things, because there's a lot of people elected who haven't been in Parliament before. So hope is high. Of course, it might be dissipated, and we might become disappointed. But it really does compare with the sort of lackluster months of the last Conservative government. I mean, if you want me to belabor the point about 14 years of Conservative rule, it's not just 14 years, it's 5 prime ministers, which you have to admit is a bit excessive for 14 years.
Absolutely,
and there is a lack of continuity because of that.
And that stability
And
seems
some
to
of
be
those
ushering
prime
finally with
ministers,
Mr. Starmer. Right.
yes, finally with Mr. Starmer. Some of those prime ministers
Right,
were,
so Mr. Nugent, stability...
as you know, one was only there for 49 days. So I don't put all the blame on Rishi Sunak. Let's put it like that. I think much of the blame for the Conservative disaster, and it is a disaster in electoral terms, should be attributed to some of his predecessors.
Right. Mr. Nugent, when I was speaking about identity, I also want to delve a bit deeper into that. Why I mention identity is because the world is changing around us. I mean, geopolitical equations are changing. And then, of course, we're seeing right-wing governments ushering in, right-wing governments being voted in all across the world. In that scenario, where does Britain find itself? Where does the UK find itself?
Well, I think I wouldn't say all across the world, but I would agree with you that in certain European countries, there is definitely a trend towards the right, notably in France and before that in Italy and the Netherlands. Where does Britain stand? Well, this is a lurch to the left, arguably, because the Labour Party is a left-leaning party. But I think you should also note that a small new party, the Reform Party, also did a lot of damage to the Conservatives, and they are a right-wing party. So we are not without our right-wing politics. It's just that at the moment, we are leaning or indeed lurching much more to the left than the right. You could argue that we're bucking the trend for the European Union, but we're not a member of the European Union anymore. And the politics of Britain are very specific to the issues of Britain. As you've referred to, things like the National Health Service, things like the illegal immigration problem. These are very specifically, well, Europe has an illegal immigration problem as well, and that's part of the reason why the right wing has reasserted itself in countries like France. So, yes, I mean, there's a trend. You're right to identify a trend towards the right, but it appears to be minimal in Britain. A much greater trend is towards the left, towards the well-established Labour Party.
All right, all right. Let me come to you, Mr. Joshi. Now, we've been talking about Mr. Starmer, but also let's shift our focus to Mr. Sunak as well, now that the UK polls are out of the way. He's been pretty successful at his earlier stints in the private sector, but now as he leaves 10 Downing Streets as the most unsuccessful person, it's indeed a very difficult time for him. But how do you see his political career from here on, and what lies ahead for the Conservatives? Would it be right to say that the Tories are on the cusp of irrelevance now?
No, I certainly wouldn't say that. As I pointed out to you earlier, that if the Labour Party got about 34%, the Conservatives got about 24%. So, they still have strong support. It's not, given our system, first past the post system, it doesn't reflect in the seats. But 10% difference in the voter support is quite insignificant. Now, the point I'd like to make is that as far as Mr. Sunak is concerned, Mr. Sunak came after the various repeated fiascos of, let's say, the Boris Johnson prime ministership, followed by the Liz Truss episode. So he was really there to pick up the pieces. So all the time he had while he was prime minister was trying to pick up the pieces. I don't think he had much time to do anything dramatic. Otherwise, his prime ministership was quite sober and quite very different from that of Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. So all I can say is that he had some amount of bad luck. And I suspect that if he plays his cards well, he might once again surface as a leading Conservative politician.
Right. On that note, thank you very much, Mr. Joshi and Mr. Nugent, for joining us tonight and, of course, sharing your perspectives on this new government formation that is happening after 14 long years. And certainly, Mr. Starmer has a tough task ahead of him. The task is cut out. He has to deliver on the promises of economic stability, the immigration crisis that the country is facing, the health crisis, of course, giving housing to people, and a whole lot more. Of course, over the next few weeks, we'll, of course, be tracking that and more coming in from the United Kingdom. But